Hi all, this is Sahil Agarwal, and I have with me Sauradeep Sarkar. We are MBA alums and welcome you all to the second episode of the Banyan Tree Show, where we quench our thirst for knowledge by sharing our curiosity with some of the best Indian nonfiction authors. Given it's our second episode, the book in focus here is funding our startups. India is among the best startup ecosystems all over the world. And despite that fact, the problem is that not many startups, founders, entrepreneurs are aware of the process of how to get funding, right? How to get their businesses running beyond a certain point of time. And this book essentially fills in that gap, educating the founders, the entrepreneurs on getting just that very fact right. The best part is that it is taking examples of both successful and failed startups, so you learn a lot more and you enjoy it as well. And on that note, a little bit about the author. Sauradeep, over to you.
Sure. So Sahil had asked me to introduce Professor Dhruv Nath, but I was thinking, how do I introduce? There are so many identities to him. So first of all, he's an IITian. In fact, he's from IIT Delhi, the mecca of Indian startups. He's an academician. He's a speaker. He's mentored to many startups. He has had a very successful corporate career, and he's also a professor at MDI Gurgaon. Incidentally, the school both of us come from, and is the director of the Lead Angels, one of the most sought after angel investors network in the country. He has authored multiple books in the past. So this happens to be the book Funding Your Own Startup. The book for the episode happens to be his fourth book. And I'll quickly run you through what this book is all about. So, funding your own startup and other nightmares, as the name suggests, this book is about that aspect of the journey of a startup, which is perhaps one of the most traded, one of the most exciting, the part that defines the success of a startup, and yet that part which is least covered. I can rarely recall any book that has been dedicated to this particular aspect of startups in Indian scenario in the past. And interestingly, it's not just about theory, because perhaps there are very few which needs to be covered as part of funding. Majority of the books are covered with interesting stories and nuggets of about successful and unsuccessful startups, molded into very small bite-sized chapters. So this book also covers few of the interesting conversations with founders of Make My Trip, India Mart, Policy Bazaar, etc. So would definitely go through this book. I'd provide you the link of this book in the description below. And with this, we come to the very first question, Professor. And that happens to be in one of the chapters, more specifically, page number 18, chapter The Basics of Funding. You mention, so why has funding become so essential? The answer is media, parties, and peers. In a country that is obsessed with startups, is it not blasphemous?
No, actually, it is absolutely true. Unfortunately, funding, see, you must remember, funding is not an end in itself. Funding is a means to an end, right? And that end is creating a successful, growing, hopefully profitable organization, right? Uh, you may require funding for that, you may not require funding, right? So, just to give you an example, if you are setting up, let's say, a B2B company and you're offering a service, right? You may not need any funding at all, or you may not need too much funding, right? Why? Because there is probably no marketing you need to do. So, the huge amount of money you need to spend on B2C marketing, you don't need to do over here. Uh, it's essentially sales, it's field sales. And at least in the initial 2 3 years, it's probably the founders who will make that sale, right? So you do not need funding. However, unfortunately, the quantum of hype that is being created is such that people, they wonder whether they're going wrong if they don't require funding. I'll just share with you an interesting quote from Sanjeev Bhikchandani, who's the founder of Naukri.com. By the way, he's written the foreword for the book. So, what Sanjeev says is the customer's money is far better than the investor's money, right? And it's a brilliant statement. He says You have to run a company where the customer is paying you. If you do that, the investor will pay you anyway if you need it. Right? Important thing is you need to fund your startup provided you need it for something. So you might need it for growth, you might need it for developing a product, you might need it to create solid amount of branding, right? In which case, take the funding. But unfortunately, there are many people who take the money simply because it has to be taken. Well, everybody does it, right? Everybody tries to become a unicorn. Boss, this time I got it at $100 million valuation. Next time it has to be $500 million. So that valuation game, unfortunately, is messing up the entire scenario. And I think it's quite bad because young see a mature guy will probably be able to live through it, but a young founder, if he doesn't take funding, he believes something has gone wrong somewhere. But if you ask me personally, a guy who is growing reasonably fast, has a profitable business, has not raised funding, I think is brilliantly successful. In fact, some of these guys like Naukri, I think Naukri has raised funding maybe only twice in all, twice or maybe thrice in a period of something like 23, 24 odd years. Right? India Mart, another company which is featured in this book, I think he's raised funding again 2 or 3 times. That's it. So funding is not an end in itself. It's a means, and I wish our media would stop hyping it up.
That's intriguing in the sense that you talk about one side of the funding ecosystem here, right? The founders who are looking for money, maybe because they would need it to grow, or on the other side for the glamour that comes with it, right? But there is another side to this ecosystem, which is the investor himself or herself, right? And let's say you are an investor yourself, right? And if you don't see a need for the money in that business, why would you invest at all? Because you are not getting the glitz and glam of that investment. So let's say if I, as a young founder, I'm still looking for money just because it is something that will give me fame, probably I'll not get funding because an investor who has seen businesses would not give money, right? And that, I guess, makes me ask a broader question: Ki, what is the funding ecosystem in India like? Right? What are the problems which are faced on both the ends of the investors and the founders? And again, as someone who has had thousands of ideas in his mind during his college days, I always wonder, money is a huge problem. And I hear founders saying that it's not. You work on your idea, money will come. So if you can walk us through the value chain or the journey of getting this funding, what can a person do to get it?
Sorry, what was your first question? I forgot.
The first question becomes, let's say, what is the funding ecosystem like?
Yeah,
What are the problems?
even before that, you said if the if the startup does not require funding, why would the investor invest? You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. The investor will not invest. In fact, one of the things we always ask founders is how much do you need and what do you need it for, and you got to convince us that this is going to make a difference to your business. If it is not going to add value to your business, why do you need the money at all? You haven't thought through it, right? Fortunately, if you look at the investor's viewpoint, we have a very large number of founders and large number of startups to choose from, right? We will always come across those guys who genuinely require the funding, and therefore we put our money there. So a guy who's only raising funding basically to please the media or to please his girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. By the way, that's a bit of a joke, so it doesn't normally happen. But a guy like that would not get funding anyway, right? So, I mean, fortunately, investors have a reasonable amount of savviness. Now, the issue about the startup ecosystem today. Um, so, I'll talk specifically about COVID times because that's what we are passing through right now. See, what has happened is that a lot of investors have, um, they have lost money because they, sorry, they have lost money because they are businessmen. The business is not doing well, or even if they haven't lost money, just surviving in their business is itself a major task, right? So that is one side, which means money has become a little more scarce. That's one part. I'm not saying it's not available, it's become a little more scarce. On the other hand, if you look at the side of the founder, there are actually multiple sectors, and I'll talk about three kinds of sectors. Sector one or category one is where the sector has been very badly smashed by COVID, right? Travel, hotels, restaurants, gyms, right? Entertainment outdoors, not indoors, right? Indoors obviously has boomed. That sector is not getting any money right now, and it will not for some time, because the investor says, boss, I'm going to wait to see how this stabilizes. Then there are sectors which have not been impacted by COVID at all, and which continue the way they used to. So for example, FMCG, right? Or for example, agriculture or agri tech, right? And these are sectors which investors are looking at the way they used to earlier. Then the third category is sectors which have been positively impacted by COVID, right? And one huge sector which is positively impacted is the health sector, right? Anything to do with improving your health, for example, eating natural food and fruit and vegetables, that has a huge demand right now. Anything to do with education, online education, again has a very significant demand, right? Anything to do with online gaming, because people are sitting at home. Three of us are sitting at home. What the hell do? We play games, right? So online gaming is becoming a very major thing. So there are these sectors which are booming, and investors therefore are looking at the second and the third category. However, in the third category, there is one very, very important caveat, which I think founders must understand and appreciate. You know, something has happened because of COVID, and therefore people's behavior has changed, consumer behavior has changed. The fundamental question everybody is asking and nobody has an answer to is, how long will this last? So, just to give you an example, schools are shut. Well, they are not shut, but all education is online. Anybody who's into online classes is just booming. Anybody who supports schools in providing learning online is just booming. Will that continue 1 year down the line? Probably not, right? Therefore, what is happening today may not be a good indicator of what is going to happen 1 year down the line. Yes, what could happen is schools reopen, things get back to normal, but by now students have got used to online. Therefore, maybe in place of tuitions, they do online sessions. That is a possibility, right? So I think the key here is people are now looking at uh, what the likely long-term impact of COVID is, because please remember, investing in a startup, it's not trading, right? You may or may not get an exit, and even if you do, you'll get an exit after maybe 4 or 5 years, even if you do, right? So you're looking at a very long-term investment, right? And therefore, you're looking at what is likely to happen to the environment at that stage. So I think these are two, three things which have happened. Of course, health tech, clearly the impact is people are concerned about health. That will continue. Even after COVID is gone, people are going to be scared. And therefore, anything to do with, improving your health, lifestyle, etc., will do well. Just one thing I want to add, which is, once upon a time, let's say about 6, 7 years back, investors would invest in bright ideas. Okay, even if the revenues were not there, or the revenues were very, very minimal, right? Today that has changed, because a lot of investors, angel investors and even VCs, they have burnt their fingers. So today what people ask for is a certain amount of proof. Boss, you have a great idea, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. Prove it to us. Prove that you got X number of customers. Prove that your number of customers and therefore your revenues are growing, maybe month on month or quarter on quarter. So today investors are demanding more and more proof, as against pure ideas. So that's one huge change which has happened, not because of COVID, but over the last 6, 7 years. And I think this change will continue.
So, I guess rolling back to the question here, Professor, is one, as an investor, are there any problems that the investors face while finding the right startups? Any gap in the value chain? And second is, if let's say today I start, maybe it's a vending machine business. and I want to. It's been running on for a year now, and I want to now go for funding. Then, how do I start? What do I do to approach an angel investor? How do I get my
Okay.
money?
See, one of the fundamental issues any investor faces is that he or a group of investors have only spent a small amount of time evaluating the startup. So let me explain the process first, and that will probably answer both questions. So typically, what happens is if you look at angel networks, right? So we are part of Lead Angel, that's an angel network, right? And you have things like Indian Angel Network, Mumbai Angel, these are some of the older ones. Now, what happens is the founder typically will apply to one or more of these networks. And I would normally recommend that you apply to more than one because you never know where you'll get rejected. So when he applies, there is a process of shortlisting, and shortlisted guys are then asked to make a presentation, and that presentation is made to all the members of the network. And typically, networks will have a couple of hundred, maybe 400, 500 members, right? So let's say about 25% of them land up and they view the presentation. Then the members decide which of these startups is of interest and therefore would they want to pursue it further. Okay. And those which are to be pursued further, we normally appoint one or two interested members who are interested in evaluating it. And these are called what we call them deal leads. Deal leads, right? So these guys will then evaluate the business in some level of detail. Of course, during COVID times, you can't even meet the founder, but at least online and on paper, one can try and evaluate. Then we make commitments once the deal leads are satisfied that it makes sense. So each individual investor decides how much he wants to invest, if at all he wants to invest. Then you have the due diligence, legal and accounting. And finally, you have the shareholder agreement signed and the money comes in it. So that's the process. Now, I think the biggest issue personally I have faced, and I think most people have faced as investors, is you do not know too much about the founder before you actually make the investment, right? The problem is very often you realize that, and you realize too late once the money is gone in, that this is not the right founder to be investing in. You must remember at early stages, the business is not as important as the founder or founders because you never know what direction the business will ultimately take. It may pivot. In fact, very likely in the first 2, 3 years, it will pivot 2, 3 times, right? If you have the right founder, he will figure out what direction to take it and he will appropriately pivot. If you have the wrong founder, you have a problem. So that's, I think, the biggest problem we have faced. And one very interesting thing has happened, and I must tell you that in the last 6 months, due to COVID, we have been able to figure out, we have been able to separate the men from the boys. All right. When I say we, I'm saying we as investors. All right. The boys, what they've done is, Are Bapre, one of you is Bengali, right? Shoran, you're Bengali. Okay. Shorbonash, আমি কি করব? Okay. And he just sits back and says, I will wait for all the various vaccines to come in. All right. those are the those are the boys. The men say, boss, I'm going to fight. I'll give you one little example. In fact, I'll share lots of examples. So this is a very interesting guy called, the company is called Iril Farms. All right, Iril Farms. What they do is they have been banking on the fact that people are very keen to move towards natural fruit and vegetables. Natural meaning pesticide free, um, chemical fertilizer free, etc., etc. Right? Organic, natural, whatever you call it. Okay. So they had identified. It's not too many places in India where this stuff is grown, but they had identified a large area in Himachal, close to a place called Solan. They identified a large area there where many farmers were growing this kind of natural stuff. And what they used to do was they would pick up the stuff from the farmers there. They had a collection center, bring it to Delhi, Gurgaon, clean it, sort it, pack it, and make it available to retailers. And the retailers would then supply it to customers. All right. Good business, wonderful business. Now that COVID happened, what happens? The entire lockdown took place and the entire supply chain from Himachal to Delhi snapped. You couldn't bring your natural stuff in, which means the boys would have said Shorbonash, like Shoradeep and the other Bengalis would say. But these guys said, no, we're going to fight. Right? And what they did was they said, okay, so we cannot supply natural products today, but even the supply chain for the conventional products, your conventional sabzi and fruit, which is not natural, which is fertilizer based, which is pesticide based, even those supply chains are in bad shape, right? From local farmers in Delhi, Gurgaon. So they said, okay, somehow or the other, what we'll do is we will pick up this conventional fruit and vegetable from local farmers. Delhi, Gurgaon, supply it to retailers. So at least, even though we are not doing our normal business, which is natural, we are doing something. Their revenues actually went up, and the good thing is that the retailers realize was these guys are fighters, and they will, they're very reliable suppliers. So once the lockdown got over and the supply chain from Himachal improved, their supplies are back to normal, and now the retailer are picking up much more. Okay, so these guys figured out a way to survive through the crisis, and that is the kind of guy, that is the kind of founder that an investor looks for, a fighter. So I would say COVID has been a disaster, absolute disaster for the entire world. But the one silver lining for investors is it has told us who are the fighters and who are the guys who sit back and wait. Yeah. And that's made a hell of a difference.
Sorry, if you'd recall the question, right? This is something we didn't intend on asking, but it fits just so well to your answer that, also in the book you have mentioned that if a founder has had a successful corporate career, that is sort of, a brownie point for them to get slightly easier funding, right? That I believe becomes one of the many factors that you as an investor would be looking at. And that begs for the question now, how much of this angel investment decision is intuition versus objectivity? And I mean, are there any of these parameters that you are looking at for in a founder to at least make that first call whether you want to take that risk or not?
So are you only referring to the founder, or are you referring to the full startup?
The full startup. Let's take the full
Okay.
startup here.
Okay. So maybe I need to talk about the persistent model at this stage, because that is really what we look at. In fact, a lot of angel investors, very interestingly, uh, who see, this is a term that we've coined, and I have a co-author, by the way, Sushanto Mitra,
Yes,
right?
yes.
You
We
haven't
saw it.
mentioned it, but yeah, we are co-authors. So, what we did was we studied lots of startups, and I have mentored a lot of startups. I've invested in some of them. Many of them are MDI alums and MDI students. In fact, the one startup where I lost money was an MDI students. But there are two, three others which I have on the horizon, where I'm likely to invest, and they're MDI students as well. They'll do well. So, uh, what we realized after all this mentoring and watching and observing startups is that there are certain common themes which are common across startups which fail, and which are also common across startups which succeed, right? And I will use the term persistent. I'll just show it up here. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to
Yes,
see
we
my
can.
face right now. You only have
Yes,
to
it's
see this, right?
visible.
Okay. So this stands for persistent, which is basically an acronym. P stands for problem. Are you solving a problem for the customer? Because if you're not, nobody pays you, right? And one very interesting comment here is I learned this from Deep Kalra, who we interviewed for the book. He says you must be an anisin and not a vitamin. It should not be a nice to have thing. It should be something which eases pain, right? That's that's uh, that's the base of a successful startup. You have to be solving a problem for the customer. The second one is E, which is, do you have an earnings model? Obviously, you need revenues, and you need revenues which are at some stage higher than costs. Otherwise, you don't make a profit. R is the risks, right? S is size of the market, because when you're creating a startup, tell me how many founders want to create a startup and say, boss, I don't want to go beyond 10 lakhs of revenue. No, I mean, you want to create something which is growing, isn't it? So you can grow only if the size of the market is large, right? So that's your S. I is innovation, which is required for you to stay ahead of the pack. The persist. The second S is scalability. So your size of the market may be huge, but you may not be able to scale within that, right? For example, if you have too much manual involvement, then your scalability gets badly impacted, right? The more the automation you have, the more scalable it is, right? So that's the second S. Then after that, you have T, which is team. And this is probably the most important, starting with the founder. After that, you have E, which is entry barrier. How do you keep out competition? And by the way, discounting, lowering price is not an entry barrier. Many founders have spoken to me. I say, boss, you get the next guy who has more money than you. He just wants to kill you. He'll offer a bigger discount. Make My Trip has killed virtually everybody else in the business simply by offering hefty discounts. They were able to survive, the other guys died, right? So discounting is not an entry barrier. It has to be something else which is inherent to your business, right? To your business model. Then you have, so I've talked about E. Then you have N, which is niche. So if you are in a market which is very heavily crowded, you identify a large enough niche which is not crowded and try and grow within that, right? And the last one is what we call T, which is traction. Like I said, today founders are looking for proof. Show us the money, show us the customers growing, right? So I would say what we have looked at is basically all this. I would also say, getting back to your question, some of it is data driven. So, for example, what we look at is, if you look at the traction, you actually look at month on month growth in revenues. How much revenue have you been able to achieve, and how are you growing month on month? Some startups do not have initial revenues, they have traction in terms of number of steady customers, repeat customers, right? Who are not paying right now, but the monetization happens later. Is there a growth in these customers month on month? What is your repeat customer? What is your customer retention rate, right? So these are numbers which we explore, right? Obviously the projections, I mean, anybody can see. You guys have been through B school, and the one thing that the two things you learn in a B school are: A, how to make PPTs, and B, how to create an Excel. And in an Excel you can be as powerful as Mukesh Ambani. You can you can generate as much bloody profit as you want, isn't it? So a lot of times we find that these projections are quite haywire. What we want to understand is not the exact numbers, because we know that will change. In actuality, that will change. But what we want to understand is, does the guy really understand the business, right? Does he understand the business? Does he have the right assumptions? Are the assumptions reasonably valid? And therefore, does it make sense to invest in this guy? So there are some objective things that we look at, but a lot of it is gut based, I must tell you. I mean, we walk out of the room and say, boss, इसमें पैसा डालना है, ये बंदा जो है ना, this guy is a long term bet, इसमें पैसा डालना है. That happens, okay? And quite frankly, most major decisions ultimately, you need data, but ultimately most major decisions are based on gut. And therefore it's a combination. And I would say, if your gut feel says no, it doesn't matter how good the numbers look, don't invest. And incidentally, me as a MDI prof, one of the fundamental issues I have is, if one of MDI students has started a startup, I am normally left with no choice. I have to put in something.
This I'll keep in mind.
Please, please
So
do.
that-
Only thing is, the quantum of the amount I put in keeps going down now, because I don't have too much left.
okay. Most likely, one of these investments will really become a unicorn, and it will all come back to you, Jay.
Quite frankly, Sahil and Sauradeep, quite frankly, if you ask me, maybe this doesn't sound genuine, but my primary purpose is not to make money. I mean, the stock market is enough to. I'm about to retire in a couple of months' time. Stock
Okay.
market is enough to make money. Not a problem at all. This, I think, the far bigger thing which I get out of this is, I spend time with young people all the time. I learn from, hopefully they learn something from me, and I learn a hell of a lot from them. It keeps me updated because, I meet a lot of tech founders. I learn today's tech from them. I meet founders who are into digital marketing. I learn digital marketing from them. So it really keeps me charged up. I would say today this is my third career. My first career was industry, 20 years. Second career was academics, 18 years. This is my third career, which I started about 5, 6 years back. And this is I mean, I finally found my career at the age of 65. And this I plan to do for the next at least 35 years. Yeah. So I'm not looking at too much money. So unicorn is, I don't think any of these startups which I've invested in will become a unicorn. Frankly, I don't care. But it is such fun, real fun. Just as you guys said you like books, I like this.
That's great. That's
And by
great.
the way, since you guys are from MDI, the maximum fun I have is sitting in that open air canteen at Sharmaji and sitting with either alums or students. It is such fun. You have as much tea as you want, as many samosas as you want, and you work out strategies for startups. It is great fun. That's one thing I'm missing during COVID times.
And I wish ki a
Great.
interview, would have been happening in that Sharmaji's canteen
I
right
thought
now.
so. No, no. So whenever COVID is over, whenever we meet, we will sit at Sharmaji's or equivalent. It can even be, are either of you in Bombay? One of you is in Bombay, right?
Yes, I
Uh,
was
You're
till
in Bombay.
yesterday.
Okay. So it could even be in Bombay on Linking Road, just outside this guy. What's it called? That guy who makes fried chicken, fried fish, and fried prawns. It's a very, very well-known place in Bombay. I forget the name. Strange.
Saradeep, I believe you have a question around
Yes.
persistence.
Yes, in fact, we were about to ask Professor to explain persistence as a model, as a theory to our, as a framework to our, audience. But since you did it already, I have a follow-up question. You have beautifully explained, how this persistence fits in successful startups throughout the book, and you have also analyzed, the startups which are not successful, how where they failed, following this model. Uh, Having said that, persistence. This was persistence as an acronym, as a framework, if I'm to put. Having said that, how much persistence as a quality is good for a startup founder? How long can he actually should stretch himself and pull him up?
Absolutely, absolutely valid. Good question. For this, I will just send you a virtual single malt. It's COVID time, so I can only send a virtual single malt. Okay. So, by the way, the name of that outlet is Jai Jawan in Bombay. Try it out sometime. It's run by an ex-army guy. It's a phenomenal place. You will not get this kind of food in Taj. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so you're absolutely right. Persistent is an acronym, but the English word persistent is what a founder needs to be because you're creating a startup. You will always have ups and downs. You'll probably have far more downs than ups. A competitor comes and eats into your customer base, takes away your regular customers. Competitor suddenly gets a lot more funding, gives hefty discounts, and you don't know what the hell to do. I remember I used to be at NIIT, and we used to put up banners about our new launches, and a competitor used to come at night and just remove those banners, right? Now, you face all these kinds of issues. I think the most important thing is you've got to be persistent. You've got to keep on and on and on at it. Yes, there will be a stage if things are not working out. You have to have the sense to realize, boss, I may need to close down. But I think what is very, very important is you need to learn from that. So when you're creating a second startup or your third startup, whatever you've learned from your first failed startup, you need to use. So anyway, being persistent is very much required. I'll go one step up. To be persistent, you have to be passionate, right? So if you're passionate, let's say if you're passionate about, so there is a startup that I have invested in. It's called Oki Pocky. Okay, Oki Pocky it's a character created by the guy. It's a baby octopus, and Oki Pocky teaches young kids from the age of 2 to about I think 7, 6 or 8 how to speak English, and it's basically meant for kids who've been brought up in a non-English speaking environment, right? And now he went through a lot of problems. There was no revenue initially, but he is passionate about the fact, boss, my vision in life is not to build a unicorn. My vision in life is, I saw when I was growing up, he grew up in a small town in a non English speaking environment. I saw kids facing these problems. My vision in life is, I want to solve this problem for them. Right? That's passion. And that passion will ensure you have persistence. Because if you don't have passion, the moment you have a problem, first time maybe you'll go through, second time you will go through, third time you'll say, Chhod yaar, what the hell, forget it. I'm giving it up, I'll take up a job. So passion becomes extremely important for an entrepreneur, and that is what leads to the guy being persistent.
But Professor, one thing that I have seen is that generally founders, they get married to their ideas to a point that they might get delusional about how successful it might be. Right? Quick example is my brother, who every 2 months will come up with a new idea, and for him the idea is the best to make a lot of money. Right, and of course he'll drop it after 2 months. But for that brief time, he is just into it and he feels so passionate about it. So even you say that there has to be a balance between persistence and realizing rationality, where you decide that it is not working and you quit it, right? Is there a way to measure when a founder should pull down the curtains and say ki nahi boss, now it is getting toxic, or it is not good?
So there are some there are some figures you can look at. For example, look, if you're running a startup, you have something that we call a burn. A burn is the amount of cash that's actually flowing out every month, right? Which is your expenses less your revenues. If your burn is positive, which means you're actually burning 2-3 lakhs of cash, 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs of cash, you have to see that burn coming down to zero, and ultimately you have net cash inflows, right? You have to see that happening. If you don't see that happening, you have to be able to get funds from somewhere. Now, normally for a startup, it's very difficult to get a bank loan. Very difficult, right? Because they have too many conditions, and you have to be profitable, and etc. 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 So I won't get into that. So typically, that funding means you have to get money from an investor, right? The investor will put in money only if he sees that burn reducing sufficiently, and ultimately the startup showing a path to profitability. If he doesn't see that, he will not put in the money. Therefore, it's very clear, when you find that your burn is not coming down sufficiently and you don't have enough in the bank left to last out more than a couple of months, and you don't see this reversing. See, sometimes you've taken some decisions where you may find this reversing, which is fine, which is great. You may come down to, I've seen founders who come down to 2 or 3 lakhs, and even after that, they've been able to turn it around. But if you don't see this situation reversing, then you have no option. You have to shut down. And when you shut down, typically what you'll do is whatever funds you have left will normally get distributed amongst the investors, which includes the founders, in the same kind of proportion. So yes, there are these um, figures that you can look at. I'll just share with you one example. Quaco, which is your seniors, two of your seniors, they had started this, and you're probably aware of this, right? Chaitanya Jha and Abhinav. So they said they had the same problem. They said, look, we've decided we'll set a cutoff. When our bank balance comes below this and we don't see a turnaround, we'll say, okay, enough is enough. But I think these guys were very, very good founders. They left at the right time. Tomorrow, if they were to create a startup and tell them that, I'm very happy to fund them again. And by the way, I've mentioned that in my book. Yeah. So if you have time, I'll just share one more quick story. You know what I think Sahil just spoke about? Founders get married to their idea. I would say there are two things you have to keep in mind. There is a vision, right? Now, the vision is long term, and the vision does not keep changing, right? So the vision may be to help children speak English better, right? There may be multiple ways to do that, and you may keep pivoting. One day you may do it online, or you may create learning centers, or you may do it in collaboration with schools. Those are pivots you keep making, but your end vision is still the same. I want to help kids of India who cannot speak English better. I'll just share with you one example, one very interesting example of people who got married to their idea. And by the way, that's a big stumbling block that a lot of tech founders face. So this is an interesting company. I won't name it. Uh, a twisted version of this is available in the book. The name of that chapter is Pure Water. Okay, but I'll tell you the real story behind it. So the real story is we had some bright young engineers. I think three of them. They were still engineering students from one of the good engineering colleges. And Sahil is smiling. So you know these guys.
No, no, no. I'm smiling for another reason,
Okay.
Professor.
I don't want to name them or the institute or the name of the company because it's not fair. So these guys came to us, and what they had created was a waterless urinal. Okay. Now they made the presentation to us about 2 months after Prime Minister Modi had launched his Swachh Bharat Abhiyan at the Independence Day speech. I think it was either 2014 or 2015. I forget which. Right. So 2 months after. Now suddenly you can imagine in that audience of members who were sitting, the angel investors who were sitting there. My God, you can imagine the kind of excitement. Boss, ये तो gold mine hai. You know, the Prime Minister has said we want to build toilets. So we said, boss, the Prime Minister has said we need to build 2 crore toilets, but where is the water going to come from? There's no water. Many of our villages, many places where you have toilets, there's no water, right? And these guys have come up with a solution which is a waterless urinal. So there was tremendous excitement. It's a gold mine. So we asked them, look, how will you sell? How will you market this? Oh, we'll appoint distributors. We said, okay, great, wonderful. So do that fast. So they went away, and our deal leads, the guys who were to evaluate the business, they spent some time. They spent, I think, a month evaluating this, but in a hurry because everybody was very keen. Boss, isme paisa dalna hai, before somebody else. And they found the solution was great. It was not very easy to copy, and it was cost effective, not a problem. We called them back in, I think, 1 month, and or I think 1.5 months, and we were all set to finalize and make our commitments. And in the process, become billionaires. So, when these guys walked in, they were they were looking very excited. So we said, boss, kya hua? Sir, now we are working on a female version of the same thing. So we said, hang on here. What happened to the male version, the urinal? Huh, sir, that's there. You were to appoint distributors. What happened? Huh, sir, we'll do it, but we are waiting for the female one to come out. This was our reaction. Okay. I mean, here were guys who had a gold mine in front of them. They had zero business sense. And, the project they had taken up had become an R&D project. And by the way, they had a professor in the team. And my apologies to all professors who are watching this. Anytime you have a professor, please make sure it doesn't become an academic R&D project. It's a business, right? So they may have developed a great product. They fell in love with their product, but how to monetize it, how to create a business out of it, they had no clue, and they were not the right people. At a stroke, we said no. We said, if you can get a co-founder who understands the business, and he has to be the CEO. One of you cannot be the CEO. If you can, we will invest in it. Otherwise, drop it. We dropped it. And even today, I think they're just floundering, right? So, that's the whole issue. You may get married to your idea, but you have to ensure that ultimately you are open to suggestion and you are able to create a business out of it. Unfortunately, a lot of founders, tech founders particularly, they are very good programmers. And I get a lot of requests on LinkedIn and my email. Sir, please, we have a great product. I said, boss, dhanda kahan hai? Can you ramp this up into a business? And there's no answer. So that's a problem with a lot of tech guys face. So I've gone beyond your answer, but I mean that's a typical professor.
No, but, that's quite interesting. And here I'm wondering that you are the person who has the knowledge of business. You are the person who has contacts. You are the person who has the money, right? You have someone who knows the product, is able to make and scale it probably, right? I'm just wondering here and going off script. Uh, if I was the investor and if I had that much money, why not bring in myself? Why not sort of take some charge there and instead of just giving the money, probably scale the business by investing more than the finances there and take because you mentioned it was a gold mine. It would have scaled had you just gotten the business person in. Why wouldn't you do that as an investor yourself?
So good question. The problem is all of us investors, we are we do mentor our startups. We do guide them, we do advise them. Very often the founder doesn't listen, or he listens and then goes back and does what he wants, which happens. That's okay, that we understand. But you must remember, we cannot be involved full time. We guys cannot be involved full time. So the problem is, if I'm going to meet this company once in a week, I may give him the right ideas, but you need a guy who's working 24 by 7 who will actually make it happen. He's the guy who's in touch with all distributors. He appoints them, he chases them, he sets targets, he ensures that there are no bad deliveries, he ensures returns are taken care of. I can't do that. I can guide him. But you need a guy who. So, I mean, I'll put it like this. Um, if you have a founder who basically has the right attitude and can do it full time, the combination of an investor who can mentor him and a founder who can do this is dynamite. It's great. But you cannot have an investor running the company. Unless the investor says, boss, I'm so delighted with this company, I will get into it full time. That can happen. But that's not what we guys want to do. That's not what I want to do. And that's not what most investors want to do.
Fair enough.
Uh,
Fair enough.
Professor, this is where my next question comes up. You talked about the decision the founders have to take where they have to shut down, and then here again, you talked about the investors, involvement, the degree of involvement with the founders. But at the end of the day, we know that the investors' degree of involvement is could be seen from a more practical point of view. He is there to make money, and he's not there to run the business. Like, right now, if I'm to take a chapter from your book again, the chapter Gray Meter, where you talk about the company Gray Meter, which happened to shut down. And by the way, for our viewers, this book covers few of those unsuccessful startups as well, so that you can take a lesson or two from here. So this is a Gray Meter is a startup that had to shut down. Now, shutting down a company or a startup is likely to be a very difficult decision for a founder, because this is his or her own baby, and he has he has his dream or her dream attached to this. But from an investor's point of view, how is he or she kind of likely to view it? Is he kind of likely to view it from a more practical chashma, if I'm to say it, or I mean, or he too would be kind of emotional about it?
So, uh, you know, I think angel investors and uh, subsequently VCs and higher level VCs and so on, they realize that this is a high risk, high gain kind of business, right? When you're investing in 10 companies, I mean, if you're lucky, only five of them will close down, and maybe two or four of them will do okay. They will basically give you back the money you have invested, and that one company will hopefully do really well, and that will hopefully make up for all the losses you made elsewhere. So investors both at the angel level and at the VC levels accept this. Okay, so it's not a fixed deposit. It's not a fixed deposit where your deposit is there. It'll not Nothing will happen to it. But the only thing is you'll get only in today's environment what about 4.5%, and on that too you'll pay tax, right? So investors accept this. They realize that this will happen. They will try their best to ensure, to help the founder to ensure that it doesn't go under. But if it does, too bad. So in my experience, I have invested, I think, in about 12 startups, right? And of these, five have wound up. And they've just wound up. And I mean, I've lost all the money I put in there. Two are doing very well. In fact, three are doing very well. And that takes how much? Yeah, four are okay. It's just about managing. I'm fine. And any angel investor, if he has this kind of ratio, he's quite okay because he is looking for that 1 in 10 which really booms and takes care of the others. So it's not really an issue. Not really an issue.
Ha-
And
ha-
yeah, sorry, sir.
yeah. Having said that, how often do we experience this resistance between the investor and the startup founder? Startup founder wanting to save the company, the investor saying, shut this down, enough is enough.
No, no, no. So hold on, hold on. So you must remember when the investor has put in his money, he has no more control over the money, first of all, right? The founder is running the business, right? And at least in early stages, the founder has significantly higher than 50% stake. Founder or founders, right? So typically, early stages in the first round, normally you will dilute about 10 to 15% equity, which means 85% is with the 85 to 90% is with the founders. So in any case, he takes all decisions. Number one, right? Number two, you must also remember emotionally, it is far tougher for the founder to shut it down than for the investor. And the investor will never say, boss, forget it. Investor will say, ठीक है, you keep on trying. I have no problem. Because the investor already put in his money and he knows if the company shuts down, he's lost all his money. If it revives, he's got at least something back. So the investor will never want to shut down a company. It is the founder who says, boss, I don't see any future. I have lost. See, you must remember for the investor, it is 1 in 20 things. For the founder, it's his only thing in life. And he's already spent 3, 4 years, right? And I've seen fatigue coming in. Boss, I keep trying. It is not, gray meter, this happened, right? I keep trying. It's not working out. So, in fact, if you remember the gray meter chapter, uh, we had looked at a possible way to revive this company. But by then, 4 years later, the founder said, boss, enough is enough. We've seen too many downturns. We don't want to continue with this anymore. Right. So they shut it down. We said, okay, your call. So the investor doesn't have an issue. And by the way, the Grey Meter founder, I talked about one company he started. Now we started another company in the area of privacy, online privacy. And he's doing very well because fundamentally he's a good guy. It was just one wrong assumption in that company that students in B grade and C grade colleges will be willing to put in effort. They are not. वो ऐश करने के लिए गए हैं. They're not willing to put in effort. That fundamental assumption we missed out. And these guys also missed out. But basically, he's a very, very good guy. And today he's doing a great job. And I think he's got his new company is well funded. So investors don't have an issue because they know, typically only 1 or 2 out of 10. Two, if you're very lucky, will do well.
Uh, Great. Now, Professor, getting to the book again. So there is a chapter, No Money for Wedding Gifts. Right? Uh, I found it very intriguing because I have heard of this idea before elsewhere as well, and you know okay, so I will struggle to frame this question here, so please bear with me. Here is an idea which is proven in a Western market, right, which we know is successful, and the incumbents, which are posed as a risk here in India, have not really, actualized that risk in the Western market. So we know that the incumbents which we are talking about probably will not take it up here as well. Why would they? Right? And that became the bottleneck for an investor to decide whether he or she wants to invest in this business or not. Am I getting it right? Right. So if you have this idea which has been proven in another market, and the risks are fairly known, the players are fairly known, how valid it is to then not give that startup a chance, and how do you differently look at it than a new idea altogether?
Okay. Uh, so as you would have guessed, Gift is not the real name of the company, and I don't think it's fair to give the real name of the company. So first of all, a concept which has worked in the West may or may not work successfully in India, and vice versa, right? And that's very very obvious. Okay. The reason why it has worked in the West is that this is a concept which has been around for a long time. The idea of people specifying what gifts they want is a very old concept. Okay. All the wedding gift registries have done in the US is they put it online and they made it easier to do, right? So which means you get your e-card and you click on the URL, it takes you to the gift registry and you select out of these. And so these companies have grown very rapidly, very very rapidly in the US and obviously in other Western markets as well, like UK and Germany. Because you grow rapidly, your ability to negotiate, because you're dealing with large volumes, your ability to negotiate with vendors who supply these gifts is much higher. All right. And therefore, the cost that you incur or the pricing you can charge for these gifts comes down. Right. The problem in India is this concept is unknown. It's I mean it's almost completely unknown. So first of all, guys at our age, okay, what do we do? Most of the time or much of the time we would like to give cash or a check, right? Because our see, weddings in India are far more expensive than weddings internationally. So we say, look, the parents have spent so much, here is a way to either reimburse the parents partially, or it is a way for the youngsters to start their life. So we'll give cash. It's a very common thing, right? And that continues. Even today, much of the time we give cash. When I say cash, I don't mean physical notes, it could be online. Secondly, a lot of people, in the Indian context, there is a lot of this uh, gift rotation business. So the market initially for this, the concept is great, but the market is small, right? The problem is when the market is small, your bargaining power with the supplier, the vendor who supplies the gifts, is minuscule, and therefore you will price your gifts at much higher than Amazon would. Okay, you can price them at about the same level as Amazon. See, people are willing to pay marginally higher because it'll be nicely gift wrapped with a ribbon and a card and all that. Amazon will give it to you in those brown cardboard dabbas, right? But you're willing to pay a little more, but you can manage that little more only when your volumes are large enough to ensure that you get bulk discounts from the vendor. So it's a chicken and egg situation. Till you get large enough volumes, you will not get discounts. Till you get large enough discounts, you won't get volumes, right? So you have a problem. So which is why we thought it was a good idea, but it probably didn't make sense. I would imagine had this idea come up at the time that Amazon and Flipkart had launched in India, it may have done well because at that time there was really no competition. Yeah. So I mean, very often this happens. Something which has worked brilliantly in the West does not work here, and corresponding something which has not worked there can work beautifully here. It happens. And you must remember, angels or any investor has lots of options. So in a startup where right at the stage where we are talking to them, we see the problem, we see the potential problem. Why would we invest? You know. So typically, we only invest where we see the chances of success being very high. And even then, 8 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 will fail.
Uh, Coming on to the next question, Professor, and this question is again from your book, and the chapter is The Phenomenal Success of Cashify.
Yeah.
So this question had to come up, a question regarding Cashify had to come up.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the reason why. not just because he is our senior from MDI, Nakul Kumar. I had a good fortune of interacting with him a couple of times, but also because this is one of those startups and you yourself have mentioned in the book. The one that has perhaps been the most successful among the ones that you have mentioned in the book. Uh, but more importantly, this is also because this is perhaps the only startup in the book wherein the VCs run after the company, the startup, and not the other way around. So I'll, leave the exciting part for the readers to leave. I won't reveal it over here. But, but my question is, when you have reached a privileged position like this, wherein the VCs are after you, and also Deep Kalra mentioned this, the one who is funding you is as important as if not as important, it's more important than the fund itself. So my question is, when you have multiple funders running after you, how do you select the right one?
So ultimately, you need money. Okay. So different investors, whether it is VCs or angels. By the way, this also happens at the angel level. If the guy is very attractive, for example, that urinal, waterless urinal, had they been, had they had business sense, we would all angel networks would have chased them because we were all keen to get into that bandwagon. So yes, it does happen where you have multiple investors involved, but different investors will have different parameters, different conditions. So first of all, the valuation they are willing to give you may vary, right? And obviously, other things being equal, if a guy is willing to give money at a higher valuation, you'd prefer him because then you dilute less equity stake, right? I think the biggest thing, the biggest difference is the value that the investor adds and the negative value that it doesn't add. So I'll give you an example. There are some investors. So there are many founders who have come to us and said, "Boss, I'm getting money from a guy. He's a typical lala businessman, और किसी से पैसा नहीं मिल रहा है." I told him bluntly, "मत ले." And you know why? I said he'll be on your head every few months. Return do, return do, return do. Okay. An investor who puts pressure on you to get returns, quick returns every month, every quarter, every year, that's not the kind of investor you want. You want an investor who is willing to give you time. And typically, a good investor should give you, I would say, 4 years, maybe even more, right? He should not be in a hurry. He should not demand returns because, a founder has enough pressures of his own. And if you have a guy sitting on his head saying, "Boss, return, 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 dividend, 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 exit, exit," I mean, how the hell can the poor founder run his company, right? So that is one thing you should never take, never. Secondly, ideally, you should take investors who can help you in the business. So those with contacts in your industry, all right? So, if you have, let's say, investors who are in the edtech space and therefore they are in touch with a lot of schools, they are the right guys if you are in an edtech startup. Okay. So investors who can bring value to your business, whether it is through experience, whether it is through contacts, that is one part of the story. And two, investors who do not sit on your head and are willing to give you enough space. That is really the kind of investor you'd look for.
Okay, okay, that's great. And I guess this is where we are about to come to a close fag end of our episode now, Professor. And uh, now I'm not an author, so I don't know what goes on behind writing a book, but you have written quite a few, four. So you do a lot of research. You talk to a lot of people to get the contents, right? During the course of this book, any interesting behind the scenes anecdotes, any nice enlightening information that you came across, any fun incidents that were there?
Okay. So I will give you a fun incident which is a little different from what you asked.
Okay.
Um, I mentioned that the reason why I write is because it's fun. And I fortunately the editors I've had have insisted on humor, and I also insist on humor. So it's like the investor and the founder. So the editor and the author have to think alike, right?
Yeah.
So I like it to be fun. And my fourth book. This is my fourth book. In fact, I should show it. There, I haven't shown it. I must show it ahead of my face. So I'll mention one incident which I think was. I mean, that is really what I was writing for. Once, I think when I had written my first book, this one, The Nuts and Bolts of E-commerce, right? My first book, again, humorous book on the subject of e-commerce, where I'm trying to simplify IT technologies for the non-techie. And in this case, it was e-commerce technology. So I got an email about 5, 6 years after I wrote this book from a student of MDI who had passed out 4 years back. And I happen to remember his name. Now I've forgotten it, but I happen to remember his name. And he said, I want to relate an incident to you. I said, wonderful, tell me. So in his email, he says, I was traveling by train and the guy opposite my berth, I was sitting on my side of the berth, and the guy sitting on the opposite side was reading a book, and in between he kept laughing. I didn't know him at all. I didn't know who he was. He kept laughing. Then I looked up and it was your book. Okay. I mean, to me, I think this was I would say, the crowning glory of whatever I've tried to do. If this can happen, if somebody can like reading the stuff, I know I won't get too much royalty. It doesn't really matter. If somebody can like it, if somebody can take it to bed and say, this bedtime reading, I can't give it up, and he sleeps at 4 in the morning, I mean, that's really what I'm looking for. So I think this was the one incident which I will probably really cherish.
Again, this is a very, very vague dream, but I have, since my bachelor's, I have always wanted to write something, right, in terms of a book. And the feeling that you talk about, though I haven't experienced it, I can imagine how it would feel. And great to know that you have had this moment.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And with this professor, what kind of books do you yourself read? If I were to like put it in the way Sauradeep asks, what does the author read here?
So, both fiction and non-fiction. I try and avoid heavy stuff. Uh, I mean, there's enough light stuff going around, right? So, if you look at the non-fiction pieces, I like reading books on the stock market, right?
Okay.
So, anything about Warren Buffett and his, I think there is a book that his daughter wrote about his, his his methods of investing. Those are, I find them so simple and yet so profound. And the guy has made, I mean, till recently he was what, number three in the world in terms of overall wealth. And I really respect the guy for his humility. He still drives his own car. He lives in a not a very fancy bungalow, and he still has burgers and cherry coke, and he watches baseball. Okay, so I mean, Warren Buffett's books are something which I like reading. Uh, Another book which I found very good was by this guy, Saurabh Mukherjee, Coffee Can Investing. Very interesting. Basically, put in your money into a coffee can, close the lid, put in your money into shares in a coffee can, close the lid, open it after 10 years. The kind of company you should invest in should be those which last, survive, and grow consistently over 10 years, right? So, again, it's a very, very good book. The other one which I have been reading is this Stephen Covey, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And I one incident from one little piece from there, which I'll just share because I think that's completely highly profound. There was a guy who went into a forest and he found there was a carpenter there with a saw and he was sawing logs. And the guy who was watching this carpenter, he realized that guy was taking just too long to saw, much too long. So then the carpenter took a lunch break. He started eating, and this guy examined his saw. He told the carpenter, "Boss, your saw is completely blunt. How the hell will you saw? You must sharpen your saw." So you know what the carpenter said? He says, "I'm too busy. I'm too busy sawing wood. I don't have time to sharpen my saw." I mean, I think that is one of the most brilliant comments I have come across. And it is so common to all of us. Spend time sharpening your saw, your efficiency levels will double, triple, quadruple, whatever. Spend time sharpening your saw. Most people don't. They just keep doing. I think that's very, very important. So Stephen Covey was good. In fiction, well, semi-fiction, I think one book I found very good was Freedom at Midnight, because it told you a lot of facts which you were just not aware of. And then I like westerns. So sudden I keep reading and rereading, because it's very nice, light reading. I read it at night on my Kindle, big font. It's good fun. So multiple kinds.
Sauradeep, we are getting some funding from Kindle, please. We are getting funding. That's great to know. In fact, Professor, we still have like so many more questions that I wanted to ask, but it's about time that we close it. Professor, it's been great interacting with you. I mean, we had a lot of fun. I laughed a lot during the conversation. So this is something that I guess both of us look forward to when we are asking questions, because what constant fear is we don't want to take non-fiction books and make it boring to the point where no one wants to listen to it. And this is definitely not one of those things. It was a lot of fun for us to just go through in terms of asking, learning by means of enjoying. So it was great, and thank you so much again for
Thanks so
spending.
much. By the way, it's also fun for me. You must know, these 19 years that I spent at MDI think the one thing I've always enjoyed is being with students next at Sharma. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of learning. And when when somebody creates a vaccine and it's freely available and COVID goes away, we'll meet once again at Sharmaji's or equivalent, and we'll have fun again.
Definitely, definitely.
Absolutely.
Looking
Or
forward to
perhaps in Mumbai
Yeah, at Jai Jawan.
at Jai Jawan, right?
it. Take care,
Yes.
Professor.
Chalo.
Thank you
Have a
so
happy
much. Had a wonderful interaction with you. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Bye,
Same.
Professor.
Absolutely same. Yeah.